Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will focus on life history theory. So, I will first introduce life history theory. After that, we will talk about key concepts in life history theory, including trade-offs and resource allocation patterns. We will go on to talk about broad types of life history strategies and how ecology can shape life history strategies. So, life history theory is a framework to study the pattern and timing of events related to growth, survival and reproduction, and also patterns of resource allocation in these events. So, if you take an organism's life, we can think of it as starting with birth and then with periods of growth and reproduction and ending with death. In an organism's lifetime, there are a series of events and patterns of allocation throughout the lifetime. So, after birth, we have a period of juvenile development and different rates and patterns of growth, followed by maturation and then age at first reproduction, body size at first reproduction. Reproduction itself can vary in terms of the number of breeding events, and in each event the number of offspring and how much is invested in each offspring. Finally, we see aging or senescence followed by death. So, in life history theory, we try to understand the vast diversity we see in traits. For example, suppose you look at age specific growth patterns. In some species like large mammals like this blackbuck antelope, with age animals grow and then the growth rate decreases and stops. In other species like lizards and fish for example, growth can continue throughout their lifetime. If we look at age specific survival patterns, there are different patterns we see in different taxa. For example, in most mammals including humans, we see age specific survival where age specific survival is high throughout most of an individual's lifetime and increases towards the end of life. On the other hand, if we look at species like many birds, we see that age specific, that survival over lifetime constantly decreases. Finally, in other taxa like in many trees, there is high mortality early in life followed by a constant mortality rate. As a final example, let us look at the amazing diversity in plant growth strategies. So, in annual species, we see an initial germination episode, that is birth, followed by growth, vegetative growth, followed by reproductive growth, and in this case only one episode of reproduction followed by senescence and death. These are semelparity annual plants, that is with only one reproductive event. In iteroparity annual plants, germination happens followed by vegetative growth, followed by a reproductive episode, followed by another vegetative growth pattern, followed by reproductive growth and then senescence and death. So, even in an annual you can either have a single episode of reproduction or multiple cycles of growth and reproduction. Similarly, you could have biennial species with a single episode of reproduction and growth and senescence cycles over multiple years. We have triennial species and then finally perennial or long-lived species where there are cycles of growth and senescence followed by either a single reproduction episode or iteroparity, that is where you have multiple reproduction episodes before final senescence and death. So, the question is, there are all these life history traits and such diversity in life history traits, how do we begin to understand this diversity? One final pattern to realize is that many of these traits are correlated. So, we see common combinations of traits. So, for example, in some species you see long development periods, a late age at first reproduction, a long lifespan, only a few offspring being produced and with a lot of investment in each offspring. On the other hand, you can have species where there is a very short juvenile development period, an early age at first reproduction, short lifespan and many offspring produced within this lifespan with very little investment in each offspring. So, to understand life history strategies, the framework that we have available is as follows. First of all, as was already introduced to you a couple of lectures ago, natural selection works to maximize lifetime reproductive success. That is, variants that produce the most copies for future generations with the heritable basis, those variants will increase in frequency and spread in a population. So, natural selection works to maximize lifetime reproductive success. Now, an individual experiences trade-offs between life history traits. That is, the resources available to an individual are limited, which means if it allocates it towards one trait like growth, there is now less available for another trait like reproduction. So, the suites of traits that can evolve are constrained. So, this is a key concept in life history theory, that there are trade-offs because of limited resources, which can constrain the suites of traits that can evolve. So, taken together, that means we might have different combinations of traits that can maximize fitness. What decides which combination of traits maximizes fitness? This is where ecology comes in. Ecological conditions can affect trade-offs. Let us look at some examples of trade-offs, since this is such a key concept in life history theory. So, in some plants we see growth versus defense trade-offs. That is, plants may either allocate resources towards growing fast and tolerating herbivory, because now there is less resource to put into defending against herbivores, or they could grow slowly and allocate resources towards defending against herbivores. Such growth, defense correlations in traits can be seen, such variation can be seen across species or even within a population, where you might have some individuals growing fast and tolerating herbivory, whereas others growing relatively slowly and defending more against herbivory. Another very important kind of trade-off is between survival and reproduction. So, if individuals invest more in reproduction in 1 year, they have less resources to allocate towards tissue maintenance, towards fighting off disease and so on, and therefore, they may experience lower survival and greater mortality subsequently. You can also get a very important trade-off between current versus future reproduction. So, greater reproduction in 1 year may be associated with more resources being allocated towards that episode of reproduction, and now with less resources available for future reproductive efforts. So, greater reproduction in 1 year, studies have shown, can be associated with a lower probability of flowering and fewer flowers being produced in the next year. One such example is the study of this long-lived orchid. Another classic example of a trade-off is between how many offspring are produced and how much to invest in offspring. So, for example, in this species of bird, a great tit, if you look at investment in chicks along a gradient in brood size, that is the number of chicks in a brood, the average weight of an individual chick is high when there are very few chicks produced in a brood and decreases as brood size increases. Now, this has fitness consequences, because if you look at chick survival increases with weight. So, heavier chicks have a much stronger probability of surviving. So, as we just discussed, there are different combinations of traits that can maximize fitness, and a particular combination of a trait is called a life history strategy. Ecological conditions, both abiotic and biotic, together with species biology, affect life history strategies. That is, they determine what combination will maximize fitness. So, let us look at some examples of how ecology can shape life history strategies. A classic kind of variation in life history strategies that has been proposed has to do with R and K selection. So, in the population ecology model that will follow subsequently, you will learn about population growth models. In these models, there are two key parameters. One is R, which is intrinsic growth rate, and K represents the population at carrying capacity, that is the population that an environment can support based on the resources available. So, these concepts of growth rate and carrying capacity have been used in life history theory to describe R and K life history strategies. So, R versus K strategy talks about allocating resources towards reproduction, so growth rate, versus competitive ability, that is surviving in a population at carrying capacity where competition is going to be strong. So, R strategists grow fast, begin reproducing early, invest a lot in reproduction and have many offspring, in which each of which does not carry much investment, and associated with that individuals also have short lifespans. K strategists on the other hand grow slowly, mature late, are large, have large body size when they begin reproducing, produce a few offspring but invest a lot in each offspring. So, offspring survival is high and individuals have long lifespans. So, both theory and empirical work has shown that our strategy works well in unstable environments where you can have unpredictable resources or catastrophes that can result in density independent mortality, that is mortality that does not have to do with competition. So, in such environments it does not pay for individuals, that is the benefit is not high to invest in survival from year to year, because catastrophic events may act increasing mortality, and therefore animals should invest in early reproduction. K strategists on the other hand are favored, natural selection favors K strategy in stable environments where there is density dependent mortality, as a result of which individuals benefit from allocating resources towards traits that help them, that give them a competitive advantage when population density is high and there is high competition for resources. Similar to R and K selection are the ideas of semelparity versus iteroparity. So, semelparity is where individuals invest heavily in a single bout of reproduction. We often see semelparity associated with R selected species. However, some species can also live long and then have a single bout of reproduction, like some cicadas for example. Iteroparity is where individuals have multiple reproductive events in their lifetime. Now, this R and K kind of strategies have also been explained as a pace of life syndrome. That is, animals may live fast and die young, or live slowly and die much older. So, if we look at the average reproductive output per breeding event on the x axis and lifespan on the y axis, we can get species that produce a lot of young and die early versus species that produce only a few young in every breeding attempt. So, say one offspring per breeding attempt, but live for a long time and then have multiple such breeding attempts. Now, the important thing is that such pace of life syndromes are sets of traits, combinations of traits, can be seen at multiple scales. So, you can see between species variation where we have some species like many rodents that live fast, die young, produce a lot of offspring with short lifespans, versus elephants which have long lifespans, large body size, a few offspring, but a lot of investment in each offspring. You can also see such variation in pace of life between populations. So, these smaller ellipses represent between population variation within a species. Even within a population, you can have some individuals who live fast, grow fast, have large broods, versus other individuals who grow slowly, have longer lives and smaller broods. Let us now look at some examples of how ecology can shape life history strategies. So, seasonality in the environment is thought to be an important factor that can shape life history strategies. For example, we can have different kinds of breeding strategies. You have income breeders who use the current energy in reproduction, in investing in offspring, versus capital breeders who build their energy reserves and then use the energy from such built up reserves in reproduction. So, for example, when we look at different species of seals, there are some species of seals where females feed and build up energy reserves, and then while they are taking care of their young, while they are lactating, before the young are weaned, they use all their stored energy reserves. They never leave to feed. On the other hand, you have other species of seals where females feed their young, leave to feed, come back, feed their young, and so on. So, these are income breeders versus the capital breeders who use their stored energy reserves to feed their young. Research has shown that strong seasonality favors capital breeding. So, individuals use periods of high resource availability to build up reserves. Whereas when in an environment where there is high resource availability throughout without much seasonality in resource availability, individuals can keep feeding and using those reserves to invest in reproduction. So, income breeding. As a final example of how ecology can shape life history strategy, I had talked to you about growth defense trade-offs in plants. Research has shown that resource availability can affect this growth defense strategy. In environments where resources are limited, there the strategy of growing slowly and investing highly in defense against herbivores has higher benefits than growing fast and losing resources to herbivores. On the other hand, in an environment with a lot of resources, the grow fast and invest less in herbivore defense and be more tolerant of herbivory, that strategy does better. So, to summarize, in this lecture, we looked at life history theory, we looked at some key concepts including trade-offs and how these can constrain the suites of traits that can evolve because individuals only have limited resources available to them. We then talked about broad types of life history strategies and how ecology can shape life history strategies. So, with this, we come to the end of the lecture on life history theory. Thank you.